Morning, everybody. I think you caught me drinking a water. So good morning. Today is February 20th. Before we get started, I want to thank everybody for all the birthday wishes last Friday. I am now 56 years of age. Holy cow, Shay. I like kind of talking to my sidekick, Shay. So one of these days I'm going to bring you over here, Shay, so you can say hi. You know what? I'm going to give it about 30 seconds because we have, I think I've told you in the last few weeks, I kind of jumped into it a little bit and noticed that people were tuning in as they kind of do it. So I'm going to give it about 30 seconds. And I got mute on so I can see. Good morning, Jeff. Good morning, George. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. Uh-oh. Did we lose the feed? No, we're still live. Okay. Well, I'm not live anymore. Am I still live? Okay, I'm still live. Okay, sorry, y'all. I know I'm still around. I guess my computer just went down a little bit. But anyway, thank you all for joining us this morning. I have kind of lost count, but I want to say thank you all so much for all the birthday wishes last week. We had a great time. We've actually been traveling the state a lot. We were in Doniana last week for the convention, Damien, Silver City. We've been spending a lot of time up north, so I want to thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Today, our topic is going to be crime and criminal reform. I think towards the end of it, I think we should talk about gun control. I think we should talk about guns and what happened in Florida. So our prayers are out with them, but I think we're all tired of talking about prayers. It's time we start talking about action. So let's talk about that a little bit here in New Mexico. Bottom line is, look, I can reiterate everything that we can talk about. We know we're ranked 50th in job creation. We know we're ranked 50th of all the good lists, and we're on top of all the bad lists. We're ranked number 1 in crime and property crime in our state, and Albuquerque is one of the worst in the country. We're ranked number 1 in violent crime next to Alaska. And in fact, if you take a look at the rankings in the U.S., Alaska and us, New Mexico and Alaska, are ranked 1 and 2 in violent crime and nonviolent criminals. Not surprising when you look at Alaska and us, we're ranked 49th and 50th in job creation. We're ranked 49th and 50th in education. We're ranked 1st and 2nd in unemployment. So we talk about this all the time. You know, I'm sure there is crime in Colorado. There's crime everywhere. But when you look at crime in Colorado, you don't hear about it. Why? Because they have 2.1% unemployment. They're educating and they're creating opportunities specifically for that 14 to 24-year-olds. And that's what our plan is. So we know crime is a major issue in New Mexico. It's keeping businesses from growing here. It's keeping businesses from coming here. It's hurting our schools. And 57,000 New Mexicans have left because of it. So we're going to solve that as we continue to move forward. We're still live, right? Okay. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties on my computer, so it says that. But when you go back to it, it's about creating opportunities. It's about big ideas. It's about a new direction for the state. So we can continue electing my opponents who've been around for 20, 30 years in the political world and has driven us to where we're at today because we didn't get here overnight. It's taken years. So it's time we start looking at big ideas and new opportunities. And when you look at our country, we're number 1 in overdoses. And now some of our counties, when you look at Rio Rebo, when you look at San Miguel, you look at some of our counties, there's some of the highest ranked counties with overdoses. And then when you look at returns to jail, recidivism rates, we said that 56 to 60% go back to jail. Then you look at states around us: Texas 22%, Wyoming 25%, Oklahoma, Nevada 27, 26%. Why is that? Why are we at 57% of our people we incarcerate go back through the system, and the other states around us only see 25%? It's because they have programs that we'll talk about. They have programs that train and help people get out of these ruts. Here's the funny thing. So we know that a lot of our prisons in our state are privately owned. In fact, I read an article the other day that shows our prisons are anticipating and asking for state increases because in the next 10 years, they're looking at 12 to 18% growth in prison population. When you look at females, they're expecting 20 to 25% growth in that. So it just doesn't make sense to me. I have lost my feed. We're still live, right? Okay. Well, I've lost my feed, so Shay, I'm gonna have to depend on you because I've lost my feed. Anyway, when you take a look at that, when you take a look at our prisons, we spend almost $600 million annually incarcerating our prisons. And when you look at the police force and the police overtime, we spend $35 to $50 million. So folks, we're spending $650 million a year to incarcerate our criminals. Now look, let me make this very clear. 65% of that is violent crime. And under an Apodaca administration, you do a violent crime. You hurt somebody, you beat somebody up, you do domestic violence, you rape somebody, you kill somebody in a DUI, you kill somebody, you're going to prison for a long time, if not for life. But 35% of our incarcerations are non-violent criminals. It's property crime. It's drug abuse. It's overdoses. It's drug addiction. And 6% of that now, thanks to this governor over the last 8 years, 6% of that now is mentally ill. Because we've cut mentally ill programs out, 15 of them. So my point is, and by the way, when you look at the female incarceration, over 60% of the female incarcerated are non-violent criminals, marijuana possession, or drug addicts. So we know that 35 to 60% of females, we know they're not violent criminals. What they are is they're looking for young people looking for opportunities, young people looking for an education, young people looking for hope and opportunities, but they get into that vicious trap of that cycle that they go into and get into drugs at 14, 15, 16, get into their communities. They live in communities that see no hope, no opportunities. Why? Because we've cut millions and millions of dollars from our education and our trade programs. We're going to change that. So we know that if we create programs that have success rates, we can move from incarceration to treatment and job training. Now let me give you some examples. Fathers Building Futures. There's an organization here, very successful, Fathers Building Futures, and they have seen a 50% drop in incarceration because what they do, instead of sending them to prisons, they literally take these fathers and these men and they give them job training, they give them hope. And they've seen a 75% drop in going back into prisons. So my point is, there's a program right there that they're basically helping fathers become leaders with job training and opportunities. We know about the mentally ill. And then when you look at females, almost 88% of the females that have been incarcerated, that 60% that are not violent criminals, we know for a fact that they've been sexually abused. They've come from abusive homes, poverty. And there's a couple of programs out there that literally, domestic violence programs, if you get involved very early and get involved at a younger age, we see as high as 88% decreases in female violence and female incarceration going down the road. And there's programs out there. And domestic violence. Last year in 2016, we don't have 2017 statistics yet. In 2016, there were over 80 calls on domestic violence, only 48,000 of those, 80,000 calls, over 48,000 arrests. But when you do early domestic violence intervention, when you go into the homes and you get those and help those women and men and teenagers, when you help them in that domestic violence, they see a 93% success rate. Again, there are successful programs in New Mexico, but the number one issue is funding. Now, mentally ill, we talked earlier, 6% of the people we incarcerate, and I know these are a lot of statistics and a lot of numbers, so I apologize on that. But we see mentally ill. We've cut 15 mentally ill programs. And now our police force, our sheriffs, are now having to deal with this, and now our prisons are literally incarcerating them. And 35% of the people that we incarcerate are literally 6% of them are mentally ill. So instead of incarcerating them, we have to move them into it. Now look, we know for a fact the drug courts are working. Doniana, I talked to the DAs down in Doniana, I've talked to the judges down in Doniana and Las Cruces. Their success rate is 86%. So instead of incarcerating somebody with a drug addiction, when they go into drug courts and go into treatments and job training, they're literally seeing an 86% success rate. Veterans courts. Look, our veterans, and we have a higher percentage of veterans. And we have a jobs plan for veterans, we have an educational plan for veterans, but within this, veterans have served our country. Over 61% have not claimed benefits. So we have a veterans program. But instead of incarcerating our veterans, We need to send them to veterans courts and the infrastructure there. And when we've done that, once again, I've looked at the veterans and the VAs, and instead of just treating them at the VA hospital, if we can create veterans treatment programs around the state, because we have one of the highest percentage of veterans in the country, we literally see a 93 to 95% success rate. In fact, Supreme Court Chief Justice Daniels, Shea, I like talking to you a little bit. I should start talking to Shea a little bit more. In an article about 6 months ago, he literally said we're running on life support for our courts and our DAs. And you saw Raul Torres here in Albuquerque fighting for budgets. We underfund our courts. We underfund treatment centers. We underfund programs that literally help our New Mexicans. But boy, we have no problem funding our private prisons. And that's what we want to change. Here's the kicker to summarize it all up before we take questions. Is to incarcerate a person in our state private prisons, or state prisons, $93 a day. Our county prisons are actually $100 a day. When you add that up with our prison population, we're literally spending $565 million a year on incarcerations. And then you throw in the overtime that our police force is using on that 35 nonviolent percent, it's another $50 million. So we spend over $615 million a year on incarcerating our prisoners. And over 215 million of that is nonviolent criminals, which really are those 14 to 24-year-old kids, men and women, minorities that see no hope, no opportunities, or have got into we've cut school programs away from them. So our proposal today is, and we've been talking about this for a while, is we want to decriminalize the nonviolent criminals, the drug addicts, the marijuana possession, the 6% violent criminals, are veterans, folks that are struggling and just get in a bad situation. And the incarceration situation, it literally works this way. You get incarcerated, you get sentenced for 6 to 12 months, you serve 3 to 9, and then you get out, and literally within 12 months, 50 to 60% of those folks go right back through the system. Now, my companies won't let me hire them because they now have a felony. They don't have a criminal background. So that's the problem. So now they get out and can't find a job. They have no job training. Most of them haven't finished high school or college, and so they have no job training. They see no hope. And they're right back hanging out with their friends that are right back in that vicious circle. And when I've talked to judges, I've talked to DAs, I've talked to police officers, literally I've talked to sheriffs and police officers in some of our rural communities that know the 5 or 6 people or sometimes 10 people every week they're going to arrest and put them right back to the system. So on the violent criminals, we're going to toughen our laws. We're going to imprison you for breaking the laws and doing violence in our society, in our community. But for the nonviolent criminals, which is about 35%, let's take that $215 million, let's decriminalize them, let's move them into 2-year rehab treatment programs. I named you 5 or 6 programs that are already here in New Mexico that are already very successful. The problem is we just don't fund them. So within 2 years, by moving that $215 million into those type of programs and give people opportunities, folks, the returns we see within 5 years, 75% of those people will not be going through the system anymore. And when you start doing the numbers, the state will literally save about $165 million a year on incarceration. And we'll lower the population in our prisons. But guess what we'll be doing? We'll be creating jobs for those people. We'll be creating opportunities for those people. We'll be creating opportunities and tax revenue for New Mexicans and New Mexican families. And that's what it's all about. Anyway, so that's kind of our plan. In summarizing it, I think that's really kind of our plan. I'm going to open it up to questions now. And our first question is from Dan from Silver City. Dan, thanks for joining us. And again, my computer, I do not know why it's not up. So I can't see the questions. So Shay's sending me the questions. I'm going to give it one quick look to see if I can see it, but I can't see it.
Refresh.
Huh?
Try refreshing it.
I thought I did. Hold on, everybody. I'm trying to refresh my page so I can get on and see who's in the chat rooms. Give me a second, then I'll ask. I promise I'll go to the questions. Okay, here we are. All right, I'm back in. Thank you. Hey, Francis Ray, I see you on there. Happy birthday, Francis Ray. Sorry I missed your birthday party. You and I are both Aquarians. So sorry about that, everybody. Anyway, our first question, Dan from Silver City. Do we know how much New Mexico police forces spend in minor offenses related to mental health? You know, Dan, I don't have that broken out, but I can tell you right now, when I've looked at the police officers and I've talked to our sheriffs, we literally spend about $30 million a year in overtime for police officers when you look at the non-violent criminals. And then when you look at statistics, about 6% of those are mentally ill. So I would assume that 6% of our $30 million goes to that. And again, when you talk about mentally ill, this governor has cut down 15 mentally ill programs that were very successful. And 3 companies came in, and we all know that 2 of them left, and now there's 1 still here. So the problem is we don't have enough mentally ill programs, and we know we have to get those programs back up and running, and we've been talking to those organizations. They're in a major lawsuit right now with our state, $100 million lawsuit. So our proposal is, when I'm governor, let's settle the lawsuit. We know they were penalized. Let's get rid of that and get them back into service. So we don't know that, but we know we spend about $30 million. So Dan, we spend about $30 million a year in police activity within the non-violent criminals and overtime. So I'm assuming we probably spend $5 to $10 million of that dealing with the mentally ill. And it's something that our police officers should not be dealing with. So thank you for that question. Anyway. The second question we have is, what specific statistics do you have in New Mexico for F ratings for our treatment avocation centers? You know what? I actually have that. I don't have it right in front of me, but there is a policy group that does rank us. But the biggest reason, and that was from Aaron from Portales. Thanks, Aaron. The biggest reason we actually have that is we have some F ratings is because of lack of funding. We have great programs. I've talked to you about some of the, Aaron, I talked to you about some of the programs that we have. We have some great funding programs, but I think what we have to do is we have to redirect some funding for that and kind of move forward on that way. So thank you for your question. I hope I answered that question. Susan from Suzanne, I think it is, from Santa Fe. How far behind the rest of the country's New Mexico access to psychiatric care? I think psychiatric care all goes, Susie, thank you for that, or Suzanne, thank you for that. It all goes back to mental health. And this governor, for whatever reason, created basically went after 15 New Mexico businesses 8 years ago and attacked our mental health, behavioral health, which is psychiatric care, and put literally 14 of the 15 businesses out of business. And they were saying because they were abusing Medicaid costs, which literally after 4 years later, none of them, I think one of them was fined like $300, $250 because of that, because of some misbilling. But bottom line is, we found out later that 3 Arizona companies came in and basically took over that. And we found out later that they were donors to Susana Martinez's PAC. And then 2 of them have left. So the reason we have a lot of homeless right now, and the reason we have some mentally ill, and now our police officers and our prison system is now taking care of them, is because we don't have mentally ill services. Now, some of them have come back. I think we have 4 or 5 programs now. But our game plan is, let's fund them completely. We can literally fund them completely. And then I've got this idea from the mental services. We can then create a Medicaid tax against them at 6%, which is our rate, and that would generate about $105 million a year of Medicaid funding for our state. But then we can literally get 2-to-1 matching funds from the federal government. So that's $315 million of Medicaid funding we can do for mental illness and mental awareness programs here in the state. Now, this isn't a new tax, and the legislators have actually passed it, and Governor Martinez has vetoed it because it looks like it's a new tax. It's literally our own industry taxing themselves to come up with Medicaid funding that we can then get 2-to-1 funding from the federal government. So $300 million is going into mental health awareness or mental health treatment programs. Now, it's not a new idea, by the way. Let me just clarify something. 44 other states already do it this way. So this isn't a New Mexico idea. This isn't a Jeff Apodaca idea. This is actually 44 states. This is how they fund between state and federal funding for healthcare programs or mentally care programs. So we can do that as we do. So I think that was a Susan question. So Susan, thank you so much for answering that, or for taking that question. Douglas from Albuquerque. Hey Douglas, how are you? I have seen a direct correlation with the termination of our after-school programs with our youth having to be affected juvenile offenders. Your thoughts? Well, Douglas, we agree with you 100%. And if you want to go back a few weeks ago, as part of our education plan, and I agree with you 100%, we have cut so many programs out of our middle schools and high schools. When I was a kid, they had trade programs. They had programs in STEM. They had programs in art and history and music. And yes, you had your pathway to education. But Douglas, our educational plan is 0 to 20. And what we're going to do is we have moved $53 million, PED, Public Education Department, has moved $53 million out of the trade skills. Some of these from federal grants. So we're going to move 8% of PED's budget at the state level back into our communities, back into our schools. And we have to bring after-school programs back. And we can look at trade skills, film and television. We can look at those industries. In fact, Douglas, we've talked to our trade skill programs, we've talked to our unions. And there's no reason for the state to reinvent the wheel. Let's roll apprentice programs and internship programs back in our middle schools and high schools so our 12, 14, 16-year-old kids see pathways. If they don't want to go to university, see pathways in that. And it does two things. Not only does it keep them engaged in school and keeps them in opportunities in school, it gives them internships, mentorships, programs that keep them engaged, and it gives them a skill set. And by the way, these are skill sets that we need. We're not training people. In 2015 and 2016, we subcontracted 41,000 jobs, Douglas, outside our state in the trade skills. I was in, real quick, and I'll go to the next question, but I was in Las Vegas, New Mexico this summer, and there was a conversation going on between, they've lost, 2,000 or 3,000 of the population. Their population dropped 22%. Conversation: should we combine Robertson and West Las Vegas? And I just made a simple question: is okay. Both schools have football teams. If you combine the schools and create one big school, now you have one football team. Chances are you're going to have 40 kids in Las Vegas out of football, right? You're not going to have 100 kids on that team. And I just asked the one simple question: what are those 40 kids doing if they're not engaged in sports or some activity? Now, I'm not saying everybody has to be in sports and activities, but if you look at trade skills, if you look at internship programs, if you look at film and television, if you look at dance and opportunities like that, those are opportunities that kept us in school. Now, Douglas, I don't know how old you are. I'm 56. In my high school, we had tons and tons of opportunities. In fact, I spent 32 years in the media business, and it was in high school and middle school that I got exposed to TV stations. I got exposed to reporters, maybe because of my dad was governor, but I got exposed to that, and it really intrigued me. So when I got to college, I wanted to study broadcasting. I wanted to study the media business, and I did that, and I spent 32 years in it. Again, we have to give opportunities for our kids. So thanks, Douglas, for that question. Gary from Albuquerque, what are you going to do to manage the opiate epidemic in New Mexico? Gary, you know what? I'm glad you asked that because we talked about that earlier. It's a major, major problem. Prescription drugs. In fact, one of my opponents passed a bill in the House and the Senate, and they literally took the teeth out of the DEA to crack down on pharmaceutical companies that were pushing opiates, right? And we know how bad that is. And now opiates has led into heroin. And New Mexico is now ranked one of the worst states, if not one or two, one of the worst states of opiate overdoses and opioid addictions. And some of our communities are ranked one of the top counties in the country. So our plan is to get in there and start creating treatment centers. And again, we talk about that. A lot of the people you're talking about, they're also creating minor crimes, and they're breaking into property crime because they're drug addicts. So we're going to solve some of that problem, but basically taking some of that nonviolent criminals and moving it into drug treatments. Now again, today our state, if you go to a drug treatment center in our state, public drug treatment center, long-term care, Gary, is 2 months. When the experts are telling us it's actually 2 years that they need. So our proposal is let's move it into treatment centers. We already know there's great treatment programs out there. I don't want to list all of them, but there's some great treatment programs already out there. The problem is we don't fund them. And then we have nonprofit funders sitting on $300 million on the sideline because we don't know how to collaborate together. Then we sit on $23 billion and invest it outside our state. Now, I'm not saying we can use those funds for these programs, so don't let my opponents attack me on that. But what I'm saying is, by investing $1 billion into small business and job creation, we will generate over $1.8 billion of new tax revenue, Gary, for our state. That will generate over $800 million of surpluses for our state over 6 years. So don't tell me there's not enough money. We know that there's enough money there. So yes, Gary, those are some of our programs, and we'll post some of this on our website too. Matthew from Roswell. Hey, Matthew, how are you? Thanks for joining us this morning. The people that are hold on, I'm trying to read your... Oh. Okay. The people that are incarcerated... Sorry, guys, I can't read Shay's handwriting this morning. The people that are incarcerated are being mistreated, and subjects are substandard conditions, and some are having their civil rights violated. This may have... Is this the same question? This may have something to do with the reincarnation. Actually, rehabilitation inmates might help also the problems of individuals. Okay, I read that really quick, Matthew, and if people are on Facebook, they might see that. But Matthew's question is basically there's mistreatment in our prisons and rehab centers, and I agree with you 100%. And again, I'm laughing because our private prison industries are coming to our state saying we need increases in budgets because we're going to see a 12 to 18% increase in population growth over the next 10 years. No one's talking about decreasing that. So what we want to do, Matthew, is we want to decriminalize the nonviolent criminals, the people like this. And again, here's the problem. I don't think we've talked about this. That 35% you're going to hear us talk about, they're clogging the system down. Because there's so many, they're not really criminals, they're drug addicts. And then they get into the system and then they do crime, or then they, some of them do violent crime. But again, if you do violent crime, you're going away. Non-violent criminals, drug addicts, possessions, DUIs, we can decriminalize them, move them into drug courts, move them into veterans courts, move them into juvenile courts, create training programs and treatment programs within that, then they're not in the system. And we don't have, and I'm trying to explain to everybody, we don't have to come up with any new dollars, we don't have to tax anybody. We spend $215 million incarcerating them right now. If we move that money, and I just told you earlier, statistics show that it costs us $23 a day in treatment and training programs versus incarcerating them at $93 a day. It's a 78% savings. So by doing that, not only are we giving hope and opportunities, we're giving treatments, and we have to create a 2-year plan. So our thought is, Matthew, and this is what we talk to the experts about. The state of New Mexico's public long-term care is 2 months when they need 2 years. Now, we're not going to shut down private prisons, but we can literally move those prisons into treatment centers and training programs. In the first 12 months, you're there at the center, you're getting treatment, and once you're treated, and we're going to be training you in the job skills at the same time. But by year 2, while you're going through rehab and you're probably recovered by then there'll be a work program, internship program, fellowship programs. Within 2 years, you'll have some type of trained skill. We have over 75,000 jobs, Matthew, within the trade skills, telecommuting skills, 75,000 jobs. We know today in New Mexico that need to be filled, and they get either subcontracted out of state or they get filled from out of state contractors. So my point is we can train people to do that. We just have to start looking. Look, you're going to hear from this campaign, big ideas, new directions. We have to start thinking differently. If we continue doing the same things over and over and over, look, it ain't working. My opponent's going to talk about what we can't do. We're going to talk about what we can do. And Andrew, Matthew, what we can do is we can move that $215 million back into treatment centers, back into training programs that we know where the jobs are. We have to give. Again, I listed off 3 or 4 programs that have 75 to 80% success rates. And when I've looked at state programs in other states, they see a 60, 70%. So we know it works. So let's just try that. As governor, we'll try that for 8 years. And if it ain't working after 8 years, the next governor can decide. But I mean, there's just proven fact. It's about reallocating the money and not letting people kind of take care. Paul, we don't know where Paul's from. How do you plan on lowering the child poverty rate? Thanks, Paul. We talked about that. I think that gets questioned. Right, Shay, that question is asked almost every week. Paul, I agree with that. 25% of our families live below the poverty line. And last time I looked, over 4,000 kids at APS are homeless. Now, there's one thing, my wife would say the same thing, is education gets you out of poverty. So our educational plan is literally start educating our kids at birth, in family programs and preschool for all. That's what we're going to do. Then you have the kindergartens, and then we'll create these programs and opportunities. But the other thing too, in our rural communities, specifically in our impoverished community, we can create agriculture, we can create telecommuting jobs for them. But by doing that, we have to invest into agriculture. We have to invest into infrastructure. And you'll hear us talk on our jobs plan about moving $23 billion that we invest into other states, into Wall Street. We're going to move just 5%. We're going to move $1.4 billion back into our state, $400 million into New Mexico technologies, New Mexico startups. We're going to move $1 billion into New Mexico industry small debt finance loans, where the state investment council will make 2.5% on their return instead of the 8 or 12% return that they do on Wall Street. That's what we're talking about. So, Paul, that's how I believe we fight poverty. You have to grow and invest out of poverty. And educating our kids, let me make this very clear, educating our kids is just going to cost us more money. And I kind of agree with the lawsuit that's going on that we underfund our education program in our state by $600 million. Now, all I can tell you is my dad was governor in the 70s when I was a kid. I probably didn't pay attention to this when I was 12, 13. But what I can tell you at the age of 56, I've looked. In the 70s, as the education governor was my dad known for, in the 70s, our state budget was actually 6% higher than it is today. Now, we spend more money today because of the value of the dollar versus 40 years ago. But we literally spend 6% less money today of our budget into education. So, Paul, the way we get out of poverty is to invest in ourselves, invest and grow our own economy, and grow opportunities for people. And that's what we're going to do. Uh-oh. Jackie from Albuquerque, and I think it's Jackie Apodaca, so I would assume it's my wife. I don't think, by the way, Shay, there is another Jackie Apodaca in Los Angeles that we found, the Jackie and Jackie Facebook, and she's a TV producer, or TV director, I don't know. Anyway, how can, let me see, what does she write? How can we work with employers to hire, what's that word?
Rehabilitator.
Oh, man, your handwriting's a little weird. Rehabilitator drug users. Jackie, that's a great question. Here's one of our issues in our state. We incarcerate people, we get them a record, so they get arrested for drug abuse. Or they get arrested for breaking into a house or breaking into a car because they're literally stealing for their drug act, because they need their fix, right? And then they get incarcerated. Then they go through the system, and now they have a record. And then they get sentenced from 6 to 18 months, and they serve 3 to 6 months, and then they're out. Most businesses, my businesses, we're not allowed to hire them because once you have a record, you can't hire them. So one of our goals is, and we need legislative approval on this, and we need help with the voters, is one of our goals our first year is going back into, let's decriminalize that. When we talk about decriminalizing it, and Jackie, that's a good question because we didn't bring this up today, but thank you very much. We will decriminalize it, but we'll also have to work with the employers, because as you decriminalize and you go through your rehab program, instead of being incarcerated, we're going to go through rehab and training programs within your jobs. Now, I've talked to the unions about this. So if we're training somebody within the welding or pipe fitting or labor or crafts position, they'll also be working as fellowships and internships and apprentice programs over 2 years with them. And we'll ask them to they'll be, once you go through the program, your record is clean. So you won't have a record anymore. So now they'll be able to vote. One, they'll be able to get a job and get a good paying job. And folks, the jobs we're talking about literally pay $65,000 to $75,000 a year. And if we can get people skilled within coding and computers and get telecommuting jobs, those jobs on average in the U.S. are $83,000 a year. Now, what those jobs mean is that you're working in Grants or Gallup in a rural community, or you're working for an LA company, or you're working for a Colorado company, but that's what you're doing. So, look, we're at the 35-minute mark. I don't see any more questions. It looks like right now we have about 32 people that are still left with us today. And I know, look, I really want to thank you all for tuning in every Tuesday. I think we're getting a lot of great feedback. By the end of the week, we usually have 2,000 to 4,000 people that tune in and watch these. But I want you to know, if you're one of these people that come in and don't watch it live and watch it taped later, and you have a question, go to our website or just email us. Excuse me. Email us at info@apo18.com, and I'll answer the question. Or give a call on our campaign phone. I'll pick up the phone. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here today. Next week, Oh, next week we're talking about wages, jobs, and job training and tax reform. That's a lot, but we'll try and keep it. And I'll try and keep it to about 30 minutes. But look, here's more importantly. This is your moment. Now, we're going through the delegate process right now. If you want to be a delegate, you want to support us in our campaign, Bernalillo elections are actually coming up this Saturday. Find out where your ward is, or call our campaign and get where your ward is. Show up with your friends, right? Show up with your friends, get in there, get elected as a delegate, and then come to the state convention on March 10th here in Albuquerque and get us on the ballot. Now, we turned in 6,500 signatures 2 weeks ago. We need 5,000 to be on the ballot, but we also want to get 20 to 25, 30% of the delegates. Now, some of the establishment's playing games with us because they want us off the ballot. Because they now know we can win. They now know we have a jobs plan that will create 225,000 new jobs. They now know with your help, we will fix New Mexico, turn New Mexico around by investing back in New Mexico. Because guess what? We have more ideas, bigger ideas. It's time for major changes. We continue to do the Band-Aid approach, the same things over and over. Folks, we didn't get to 50th because we're unlucky. We got to 50th because we have lack of leadership. And coming from the private sector, putting private-public partnerships together, I can tell you right now, you have seen our jobs plan, you have seen what we can do, and we're going to invest into you. We're going to invest into your children. You're going to invest into your grandchildren. And we're going to stop our college graduates leaving our state. And that's what our campaign's about. Now, we talked about criminal activity. We talked about how we can move 35% of our nonviolent criminals into rehab training programs and spend less money. Think of the $160 million a year we'll save, what that could do within high-risk pools healthcare, what that could do with early child development. I just found a way how to fund early child development 100% within 2 years. And we haven't even calculated out the job growth and the tax revenue that our state would make by not incarcerating these folks, but giving them job training and giving them hope and opportunities. So this is your moment. I'd ask you, everybody, become a delegate, work on our campaign, volunteer in our campaign, get us on the ballot, which will be coming up, and then in June 5th, vote for us. Because it's time for major change in New Mexico, because if we continue to elect the same career politicians over and over and over, and you keep hearing the same rhetoric, I just ask you, if you're new to our Facebook page, go to our Facebook page, take a look at our jobs plan, 225,000 new jobs. My congresswoman opponent told me non-credible. Said it in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Non-credible. When I become governor, she said, I'll create a realistic jobs plan. We have a jobs plan. We're going to invest $1 billion, 5% of your money back in New Mexico. In New Mexico, keep the money here. We're going to bring private capital here. We're going to invest in renewable energies. We're going to invest into our schools. We're going to invest in small business. We're going to invest in biotechnology at the University of New Mexico. We're going to invest in agriculture and value-added agriculture with our southern and our northern agricultures and New Mexico State. And yes, we're going to decriminalize marijuana. We're going to decriminalize cannabis. We're going to decriminalize nonviolent criminals, give job opportunities, and we're going to legalize and expand medical cannabis and adult use cannabis so we can create 32,000 new jobs and $200 million in new tax revenue. So I thank you all for joining us today. Next week, we're going to talk about wages and job training and taxes. Tune in every Tuesday, Turnaround Tuesday at 10 a.m. Anyway, thank you all for joining us very much, and all have a great day. God bless you guys. Thank you.